The annual Williams family 4th of July barbecue was in full swing when my brother David decided to make me the afternoon's entertainment. The backyard at Mom and Dad's suburban house was packed with 30 relatives, all gathered around picnic tables laden with potato salad and corn on the cob, cold beers sweating in the summer heat. "Sarah's been awfully quiet today," David announced to the crowd, his voice carrying that particular tone he'd perfected since childhood, the one that meant I was about to become the center of unwanted attention. "Must be planning her next big story about how important she is." Laughter rippled through the gathering. My Uncle Frank raised his beer bottle in David's direction. "What's she claiming to be now? Faye. Supreme Court Justice." "Oh, it's even better," David said, warming to his audience. "She works for some political consulting firm in Washington. Makes it sound like she's personally advising the president." I kept my attention focused on my plate of barbecue, trying to avoid engaging with what had become a family tradition, making fun of Sarah's mysterious government job. "Remember last Christmas?" My cousin Jennifer chimed in. She said she couldn't discuss her work because of security clearances. Like she's handling state secrets or something. "Stop pretending you're important," David said, his voice rising for dramatic effect. "You're nobody special. We all know you're probably filing papers in some basement office, but you want us to think you're running the country." The entire backyard erupted in laughter. Even Mom and Dad were smiling, though they looked slightly uncomfortable with David's public mockery. "Sarah's always been dramatic," Aunt Linda added. "Remember when she was 12 and insisted she was going to be president someday?" "At least that was age-appropriate fantasy," David said. "Now she's 34 and still playing make-believe about her career." I took a sip of my iced tea and checked my phone. 2 missed calls from Governor Patricia Morrison's chief of staff. "I'd have to call back later." "See?" David pointed at my phone. "Probably checking her horoscope, but she wants us to think it's urgent government business." More laughter. "David," Mom said gently, "maybe leave Sarah alone. She works hard." "I'm sure she does," David replied. "But working hard at a regular government job doesn't make you a political power player. Sarah acts like she's personally shaping national policy." My phone buzzed with a text message. I glanced at it. Urgent. Governor arriving at 4 p.m. for security briefing infrastructure bill vote. Please confirm location. I checked the time. 3:52 p.m. I quickly typed back. Williams Family Barbecue, 1847 Maple Street, Springfield. "We'll be ready." "There she goes again," Jennifer said, watching me type. "Probably texting her imaginary contacts in the State Department. Or ordering takeout," Uncle Frank suggested, but making it look official. David was enjoying himself. "Sarah, why don't you tell everyone what you really do? Not the mysterious government consultant story, but your actual job description." I looked up from my phone. "I work on legislative strategy and policy implementation for the Morrison administration." "The Morrison administration?" David laughed. "You mean Governor Morrison? Sarah, that woman has dozens of policy advisors. You're not personally working with the governor." "Legislative strategy sounds made up," Jennifer added. "Like, what does that even mean in real life?" "It means I analyze proposed legislation, assess political feasibility, and develop implementation strategies for priority initiatives," I said calmly. David rolled his eyes. "See? She talks like she's briefing Congress, but she probably works in some cubicle farm reviewing paperwork." "With security clearances," Uncle Frank said mockingly. "Don't forget the top-secret security clearances." The laughter continued. I'd been enduring variations of this conversation at every family gathering for the past 8 years, ever since I'd taken a position with the state government that I couldn't fully explain without violating confidentiality agreements. My phone buzzed again. This time it was a call from Governor Morrison herself. "Sarah," Mom said, noticing the incoming call, "maybe take that inside? We're trying to have a family gathering." "Actually," I said, standing up, "this might be relevant to everyone here." I answered the call and put it on speaker. "Hello, Governor Morrison." The backyard went completely silent. 30 people holding plates of barbecue, all staring at my phone. "Sarah." Governor Morrison's voice filled the summer air with unmistakable authority and warmth. "I hope I'm not interrupting your holiday celebration." "Not at all, Governor. What can I do for you? We have a situation with the infrastructure bill. The federal delegation is requesting an emergency briefing on the state's position before tomorrow's Senate vote. I know it's a holiday, but... Of course, I said. What do you need? Full briefing on implementation timeline, budget allocation and political feasibility. The usual comprehensive analysis you provide before major votes. David's beer bottle was frozen halfway to his mouth. I can have the briefing materials ready within an hour, I said. Perfect. I'm actually en route to your location now. My detail should arrive in about 3 minutes. Is there somewhere private we can work? Every single person at the barbecue was staring at me with expressions ranging from confusion to shock. The study upstairs should work fine, I said. Excellent. And Sarah? Bring the polling data on rural infrastructure priorities. The senators specifically requested your analysis on small-town economic impact. I have everything we need. Outstanding. See you shortly. I ended the call and looked around the backyard. 30 family members sat in absolute silence, processing what they'd just heard. The governor is coming here? Mom said weakly. In about 3 minutes, according to her detail. Her detail. Dad repeated. Security detail. The governor doesn't travel without protection. David was still holding his beer bottle in midair. Sarah, what exactly is your job? Senior Policy Advisor for Legislative Strategy, I said. I've been Governor Morrison's lead policy analyst for major legislation since she took office. Lead policy analyst? Jennifer's voice came out as a whisper. I developed the strategic framework for the governor's legislative priorities, analyze political feasibility, and coordinate implementation across state agencies. Uncle Frank set down his beer. You work directly with the governor? Daily briefings, policy development sessions, strategic planning meetings. Plus crisis management when federal legislation impacts state operations. The sound of vehicles approaching interrupted our conversation. Through the front windows we could see black SUVs pulling up to the house. 3 of them with official government license plates. Oh my God, Aunt Linda said, rushing to the window. There are actual government cars outside. The vehicles arranged themselves in a professional formation around our driveway and street. Men and women in dark suits emerged from the first and third vehicles, immediately establishing a security perimeter around the property. Sarah, Mom said, her voice barely audible, what should we do? Just stay in the backyard, I said. The security team will handle everything. The front door opened, I'd given them the entry code earlier, and Governor Patricia Morrison walked into our house as if she belonged there. She was immediately recognizable from television and newspapers, but seeing her in person in Mom's living room was surreal for everyone except me. Sarah, the governor called out. Ready for that briefing? I walked through the house to meet her, aware that 30 family members were following at a respectful distance, all trying to process what was happening. Governor Morrison, I said, extending my hand, thank you for coming here. I know holiday logistics are complicated. Nonsense, she said, shaking my hand warmly. Crisis management doesn't observe holidays. Besides, I wanted to meet your family. You've spoken about them often. She turned to address the crowd of relatives who had gathered in the doorway between the living room and kitchen. You must be Sarah's parents, she said, approaching Mom and Dad with practiced political grace. Robert and Linda Williams. Sarah talks about you constantly. Governor Morrison, Dad said, clearly overwhelmed. It's an honor to have you in our home. The honor is mine. Sarah is one of the most brilliant policy minds I've ever worked with. You should be incredibly proud. Mom was staring at the governor like she might be hallucinating. Sarah works directly with you? Sarah is my legislative strategy team for major initiatives, Governor Morrison said. When the federal government proposes legislation that affects our state, Sarah provides the analysis that determines our official position. Her work influences millions of dollars in federal funding and affects every citizen in our state. David finally set down his beer bottle. Governor, when you say Sarah influences federal legislation, I mean that Sarah's policy analysis and strategic recommendations directly shape how our state responds to federal initiatives. The infrastructure bill we're discussing today? Sarah's feasibility analysis and implementation timeline will determine whether our state receives $2.3 billion in federal infrastructure funding. $2 billion? Jennifer repeated. Sarah's recommendations carry significant weight because her analysis is consistently accurate and politically astute, the governor continued. Federal senators request her briefings specifically because they trust her assessment of how legislation will impact local communities. Uncle Frank was shaking his head slowly. We didn't realize that she was one of the most influential policy analysts in state government? Governor Morrison smiled. Sarah is remarkably humble about her work. Most people in her position would ensure everyone knew exactly how important their job was. Why didn't you tell us? Mom asked me directly. I tried to, I said gently. Every time I mentioned working on major legislation or briefing federal officials, someone said I was exaggerating my importance. The memory of years of family mockery hung in the air. Sarah, the governor said, checking her watch, we should move to that briefing. The Senate vote is tomorrow morning, and we need comprehensive analysis before I speak with the delegation tonight. Of course, the study upstairs has everything we need. As we headed toward the stairs, Governor Morrison paused to address my family one more time. I hope you all realize how fortunate you are to have Sarah in your family. In 8 years of public service, I've never worked with anyone who combines analytical brilliance with practical political judgment the way she does. Sarah doesn't just analyze policy, she understands how to make complex legislation work for real people in real communities. David stepped forward. Governor Morrison, can I ask you something? Of course. How important is Sarah's work? Really? The governor considered the question seriously. David, your sister's analysis has influenced over $15 billion in federal funding decisions for our state. Her policy recommendations have shaped legislation affecting healthcare, education, infrastructure, and economic development. When federal senators need to understand how their proposals will impact ordinary families, they request Sarah's briefings. But she lives in a regular apartment, Jennifer said, still trying to process the situation. She drives a normal car. Public servants often maintain modest lifestyles, the governor explained. Sarah's work is about public service, not personal enrichment. She could easily earn 3 times her government salary in the private sector, but she chooses to use her talents for public benefit. 3 times her salary? Dad asked. Minimum. Policy analysts with Sarah's experience and track record are highly sought after by consulting firms and corporations. But Sarah believes in using her skills to help people rather than maximizing her income. I was getting genuinely uncomfortable with the praise. Governor Morrison, we should probably start the briefing. Right you are. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for sharing your holiday with state business. Please, continue enjoying your barbecue. The governor followed me upstairs to Dad's study, where I had files and laptops set up for exactly this kind of emergency briefing. Through the windows, we could see the security detail maintaining their perimeter around the property. Sarah, the governor said as we settled in with the briefing materials, I hope your family understands now why I rely on you so heavily. They're still processing, I think. It's difficult for families to understand the scope of high-level government work, especially when the person doing it is modest about their contributions. We spent the next 2 hours reviewing implementation timelines, budget allocations, and political feasibility assessments for the federal infrastructure bill. The governor would use my analysis to brief the state's congressional delegation, who would vote on whether to support $2.3 billion in federal infrastructure funding. At 6:30 p.m., we concluded the briefing and prepared to rejoin my family downstairs. Sarah, the governor said as we packed up the materials, this analysis is exactly what I needed. Your assessment of rural economic impact will be crucial for tomorrow's vote. The polling data shows strong bipartisan support for infrastructure investment in small communities, I said. That should help with the Senate vote. Agreed. And your implementation timeline gives us concrete deadlines for project rollout. This is precisely why federal officials specifically request your briefings. When we returned to the backyard, the barbecue had resumed, but the atmosphere was completely different. Instead of casual family conversation, there was a sense of awe and nervousness as 30 people tried to act normal around the governor of their state. How did the briefing go? Mom asked, bringing us plates of food. Sarah provided exactly the analysis we needed, the governor said. Tomorrow's Senate vote will determine whether our state receives historic infrastructure funding, and Sarah's work gives us the strongest possible position. David approached hesitantly. Governor Morrison, can I apologize for earlier? I didn't understand what Sarah actually does. No apology necessary, the governor said graciously. Most people don't realize the complexity of high-level policy work. It's not as visible as other careers, but it's incredibly important. I feel like an idiot, David said. I spent years making fun of Sarah for pretending to be important, and it turns out she actually is important. Important work doesn't make someone more important as a person, I said. We're all just doing different jobs. Sarah, your job affects millions of people and billions of dollars, Uncle Frank said. That's not just different, that's extraordinary. Governor Morrison nodded. What's extraordinary is Sarah's combination of analytical brilliance and personal humility. She could leverage her expertise for personal gain, but she chooses public service. At 7 p.m. the governor prepared to leave. Her security detail had maintained their professional perimeter throughout the visit, and now they smoothly coordinated her departure. Sarah, she said as we walked to her vehicle, thank you for the excellent briefing. I'll call you tomorrow after the Senate vote to discuss implementation next steps. Of course, Governor. I'll have updated timeline projections ready. Perfect. And thank you for hosting this at your family gathering. It was lovely to meet everyone. She turned to address my family who had gathered on the front lawn to see her off. William's family, she said warmly, you should know that Sarah is one of the most respected policy analysts in state government. Her work makes a real difference in people's lives every single day. With that, the governor was escorted to her vehicle, and the motorcade departed as efficiently as it had arrived. Within 5 minutes, our quiet suburban street returned to normal, leaving behind only the memory of government vehicles and the lingering sense that everything had changed. Back in the backyard, my family sat in contemplative silence, processing what had just happened. Finally, Dad spoke. Sarah, we owe you a massive apology. You don't owe me anything, Dad. Yes, we do. For years, we've dismissed your work, made fun of your career, treated you like you were delusional about your own importance. While you were actually advising the governor and influencing federal policy, Mom added, her voice thick with emotion. David sat down beside me. Sarah, I'm sorry. Really truly sorry. I spent this afternoon mocking you for pretending to be important, and then the governor of our state showed up to personally brief with you about multi-billion-dollar federal legislation. I wasn't pretending, I said quietly. I know that now. God, I feel terrible. Jennifer approached our table. Sarah, can I ask why you never corrected us more directly? Why you let us think you were exaggerating your job? I considered the question. Because I wanted to know that you valued me as a person, not just as someone with an impressive career title. If I'd led with, I'm the governor's senior policy advisor, would your interest have been genuine or just based on my professional status? The question hung in the evening air. That's not fair, Uncle Frank said gently. We should have been interested in understanding your work regardless of how impressive it sounded. Maybe, I said. But I also didn't want family gatherings to become networking opportunities or requests for political favors. Mom was crying quietly. Sweetheart, we made you feel like you couldn't share your accomplishments with your own family. I could share them, I said. I just couldn't make you believe them. David was shaking his head. The governor said you could earn 3 times your current salary in private consulting. Probably more than that, actually. But you choose public service. I choose work that matters more than maximizing my income. Work that influences billions in federal funding, Dad said, still processing the scope of what he'd learned. Work that helps determine how federal policies affect ordinary families, I corrected. The money is just a measurement of scale. Aunt Linda rejoined our conversation. Sarah, what's it like? Working at that level of government. Complex, I said. Every decision has consequences for millions of people. Every analysis has to account for political realities, economic impacts, and practical implementation challenges. And stressful? Mom asked. Sometimes. But also incredibly fulfilling. When we get policy right, it improves people's lives in measurable ways. Like the infrastructure bill? Jennifer asked. If it passes, it will fund road repairs, bridge upgrades, broadband expansion and water system improvements in dozens of communities across the state. Real projects that affect real people. And your analysis helps determine whether it passes? My analysis helps state officials understand the bill's implications and advocate effectively for our state's interests. David raised his beer bottle. To Sarah, who's been changing the world while we thought she was filing paperwork. Everyone raised their drinks, beer, iced tea, soda. To family members who surprise us with their extraordinary accomplishments, Mom added. To understanding each other better than we did this morning, I said. As the evening continued, the conversation shifted to genuine curiosity about policy work, government operations, and the intersection of federal and state politics. My family asked thoughtful questions about my career path, my daily responsibilities, and the challenges of high-level government work. Sarah, Dad said as we cleaned up the barbecue, I'm proud of you. Not just because you're successful, but because you're using your success to serve others. Thank you, Dad. That means a lot. I'm also sorry it took the governor personally showing up to make us realize what you actually do for a living. Sometimes seeing is believing, I said. From now on, David said, we'll try to do better at listening and understanding instead of assuming and dismissing. I'd appreciate that. And Sarah, Mom said, hugging me as we finished putting away chairs. Next time you mention working on important legislation, we'll believe you. Even if it sounds too impressive to be true? Especially then. 3 months later, the infrastructure bill passed the Senate by a narrow margin, securing $2.3 billion in federal funding for our state. Governor Morrison credited my policy analysis as instrumental in building the coalition that made the vote possible. At our next family gathering, Labor Day weekend, David introduced me to his friends as my sister, Sarah, who's senior policy advisor to the governor. That sounds made up, one of his friends joked. Trust me, David said, grinning at me, it's not. And for the first time in 8 years, my family understood exactly what that meant.